Carney just used the A word. No, it's not what you think. Austerity was coming out of the Prime Minister's mouth yesterday. What the heck does that mean? What does it mean for the budget coming up in the fall? To break it all down, joined by Speer, co-founder, here in the studio. Sean, lots of ways to take this, but historically, let's start there. When a politician and a prime minister going into a consequential budget uses the A word, austerity, what does that mean?
Yeah, there's something refreshing about the prime minister talking this way. You get the sense it's an example of him not having been a longtime politician, if that makes sense, because I assure you, even a budget-cutting conservative prime minister would have been discouraged by his or her team not to use the A word. Austerity typically is limited to instances of almost like fiscal crisis. We've seen instances, for instance, of austerity in Europe at different times over the years. And so it's an interesting prepositioning from the prime minister, clearly trying to get ahead of a series of spending cuts that will come from different departments in October's budget. I guess the fundamental question, Rudyard, is how he's defining austerity. Because typically austerity implies that we're going to see spending not grow at a slower rate than it has in the past, but actually decline. And I don't think there's reason to think or believe that this is going to actually be a budget that involves a net reduction in spending. So all this to say, interesting prepositioning, good on Prime Minister Carney for talking about the need to control spending. But one gets a sense that this is a bit of an elastic definition of austerity, at least as we typically understand it.
He was critical, almost as directly as you can be, regarding his predecessor, saying that it was unsustainable for government spending to grow at an annualized rate of 7% as it did during the Trudeau years. So when he talks about austerity, is he talking about this, you're going to have to explain to me, the operational budget and bringing that into balance? So is that where austerity falls? Because he's ruled out transfer payments to provinces, to individuals, and transfer payments for healthcare. So what's left?
Yeah, that's one of the interesting things about the composition of the federal budget. Directionally, it's right to say it almost involves three separate categories. There's transfer to individuals like old age security and employment insurance. There's transfers to provinces like healthcare, equalization, and so on. And then there's the rest, what's sometimes called direct program spending. In this spending review that the Carney government has carried out, where ministers are forced to come forward with proposals to reduce spending within their portfolio by 15%, is concentrated on that third category. So it's possible what we see coming out of this budget, Rudyard, is that spending continues to grow because it's being pushed up by transfer payments to individuals and other orders of government, but that third category, direct program spending itself, experiences a decline. Even that, though, I think shouldn't be underestimated in terms of the political challenges involved in that direct program spending category. Is a spending on Indigenous communities, for instance, a lot of different grant payments to stakeholder groups that would be adjacent to kind of liberal politics. So again, I think the prime minister should be lauded in a way for talking this way in advance of the budget, but I don't think we should underestimate the challenges of actually delivering an austerity budget.
It's a good point, Sean, because what you're effectively saying is that while the federal budget is big and comprehensive, if you simply want to slow the rate of change from 7% a year annualized growth to, let's say, 0, or growth that is tracked to rises in population or some other maybe more reasonable metric, there's just effectively a third of the budget that he's identifying where those cuts can come from. So doesn't that mean, Sean, that politically you're going to have to be willing to bear a much bigger pain point than spreading those cuts across? And then to add, in a sense, what is a kind of triple flip that he's going to perform in this budget, he's saying, on one hand, austerity, but on the other hand, investments. Explain that. I mean, how do you get to a balanced budget in 3 years if you've said, okay, 2/3 of the budget is off the table, we're not even going to touch it, and then, hey, we're going to do this thing called investments in addition to austerity? Like, is the 3-year budget pledge credible?
It starts to sound a bit like 2 + 2 = 5, doesn't it? And I think you've zeroed in precisely on the right point. We've published work by economist Trevor Tombe that estimates that if he was genuinely committed to balance the budget in 3 years after having backed out transfer payments.
The entire budget or the operational
budget?
Okay. And just for the sake of lay people, I include myself in it. The operational budget, when people say that, what does that mean? Does that include transfer payments? Does it include defense spending? Does it include some of these big ticket items, or is it something different?
The short answer is we don't precisely know.
Okay. It's whatever you want it to be.
And I think there'll be a lot of eyes on how the government is indeed defining the operating budget, because if you back out all different types of spending and then declare mission accomplished on a balanced budget, I don't think it's going to be persuasive to Canadians or to markets. But just to directly answer your question, what the Prime Minister is saying is that he wants to balance the budget comprised of what you might characterize as consumption spending today on grant payments to different organizations, the cost of running the government itself. But he's going to back out of that what he would characterize as investment, public spending that produces some kind of return, like say.
And defense spending, you think?
I think that because some defense spending involves the acquisition of equipment or technology or whatever, I think the government will try to argue that is more like an investment than it is consumption. But even setting that aside, because we don't quite know how that is precisely going to work, I just want to zero in on the point you make about just how hard it is to balance the operating budget, however one defines it, given what he's already committed to kind of ring fencing. We published work by Trevor Tombe a couple of weeks ago that estimates that if you took for granted that the goal was to balance the budget in three years, having backed out those different types of spending, we'd be looking at spending cuts of the direct program spending of a magnitude of like 40 to 60%.
Okay, well, that's not going to happen.
It just seems completely implausible because of, there's not a lot of, it's like easy to say that that there's a lot of things the government shouldn't be doing. That would, I think, be our perspective. But all of those spending items come with some political cost on the other end. And I don't get the sense that the Carney government, notwithstanding these recent comments about austerity, has socialized the country
maybe this
to
is the
anticipate
beginning.
40 to 60% spending cuts.
Final point. I mean, he's criticizing Trudeau, saying it was unsustainable to grow spending 7% year over year, effectively doubling the size of government in a decade, measured by employees, by percentage of GDP, et cetera. But he's all rumors suggest he's going to table a budget that will have a deficit that is larger than any deficit under the entire Trudeau decade. So again, please help me here. I'm trying to understand, how can on one hand you be telegraphing austerity and fiscal prudence, but at the end of the day, whether you characterize it as an investment or an operational expense, it's still borrowing. It's still a deficit. And the rumor is $92 billion or more. That will be double what a number of Trudeau's already hefty deficits were.
That's right. And this is the part about the Prime Minister's prepositioning since the election that I found confusing. You recall he commits to balance the operating budget in 3 years during the campaign, and that, at least in part, was designed to distinguish him from the Trudeau years. But I must admit, I took for granted that between now and then, that message would be subordinated. And yet here we are, 6 weeks away from the budget, and he's reinforcing, he's doubling down on a message of austerity. I just don't quite understand how you square that, given, as you say, the other message is we're going to see more spending, bigger government, likely a larger deficit. At some point, all of this has to reconcile itself.
So my final point here is I think an answer might be found right now in Europe. Both the United Kingdom and France are experiencing basically a run on their bond markets. Their long duration debt that they're trying to sell internationally, the yields have spiked. UK debt is now as expensive as it's ever been, going right back to the early 1990s. France, which is experiencing some political turmoil, similarly has seen its borrowing costs soar. Carney's a central banker. I'm wondering if this austerity language not simply positioned for whatever domestic political audience. He's trying to send a message to international bond holders of Canadian debt and future purchasers to say, hey, I've got a path here. I've got my hands around this. We're not France and we're not Britain, even though, as we've discussed in the past, the borrowing costs on longer duration Canadian debt over the last 12 months have gone up, and they've gone up more than in the United States. They're tracking much closer to France and Britain right now. I don't know. There may be other games afoot here. The bond vigilantes may be circling out there around Canada, and maybe Carney is hearing the pounding of their hooves as they kind of ride in to challenge our borrowing and our fiscal sustainability. That would be the first time since the 90s that we've had that kind of additional challenge to our fiscal and budgetary planning.
I think that's really smart. And I think you might be right. What reinforces that hypothesis is that the use of the language of austerity is European language, right? It's how we talked about the debt crisis in Europe, for instance, when Carney was in Europe or was head of the was the head of the European the British Central Bank. So maybe you're right. Maybe this isn't inadvertent political speak that may get him some criticism at home. Maybe he's really targeting those international bond creditors who he knows and is sensitive to their psychology.
Yeah. Well, we will continue to track this carefully, Sean. 6 weeks away. Markets are looking a little shaky. It'll be interesting to see how this all plays out.
Indeed. A defining moment for the Carney government.
Yeah. Well, this video, in fact, all of our videos this month are being brought to you by Airbnb. We're just thrilled to have Airbnb as a sponsor of the Hub's YouTube channel. And we've talked a lot on this channel about the housing crisis facing Canada. We know now that, some people think that short-term rentals are a big part of the problem and that they're taking supply off the market. That's not been our view at the Hub. We think that it doesn't, frankly, make a lot of sense. We support Airbnb's contention that the median number of nights an Airbnb hosting Canada has guests is 55. There's a full 300 left out there that Airbnb and others could be renting those homes for. So these rental properties are not full, and honest Canadians are trying to get by renting them to us. We think that's great. Statistics Canada has reported the amount of Airbnbs that could actually be converted into long-term homes is also only 0.6% of Canada's housing stock. Canada needs new solutions to tackle the whole of the housing market, not just 0.6%. We encourage you to go check out Airbnb's information on this topic at airbnb.ca/closer look. Until next time, bye-bye.